Welcome to another episode of Legitimate Matters. I'm your host, William Parris. The topic that we're talking about today is something that is really close to my heart. It's mental illness in the African American community. Recent reports state that 20% of African Americans, and I believe it's even more than that, have reported issues with mental illness, but many do not report it. My guest today is Steven Welch, a psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience in the field of mental health. Steven, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you, William.
Now, you've been in this practice for 25 years. Can you tell me what are some of the trends or what you've noticed about African Americans reporting mental illness? What are some of the stigmas that you've come across in your practice?
On the hopeful side, more people of color are using psychotherapy. I think stigma has somewhat reduced. And when you think of people in the media, like the show This Is Us, one of the main characters has a mental health issue. Dwayne Rock Johnson has gone on record about talking about mental health. Chance the Rapper has also talked about mental health issues. So I think it's becoming more of a media openness by people of color.
One of the concerns that I have, and what I've considered just in my own experience, that African Americans might be carrying mental illness from one generation to the next. That's a big concern of mine. And when I think about our history, or just the history of people of color in general, it just goes back. It goes back over 100 years. It started with slavery, all kinds of issues that happened in terms of oppression and abuse. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm going to answer that with a story.
Okay.
My son is now almost 30, and I took him to the Slave Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. And one of the museum is designed in a way to make you feel like you're walking into a slave ship, into the hold. And one of the images that was there was a woman naked being force-fed by the overseer or whoever's in charge on the ship. And when my son saw that, he actually kicked the statue.
Oh, wow.
Because he felt that was such a bad thing that was happening. Why are they doing that? And I had to explain to him what that was all about. So he actually experienced generational trauma, in a sense, right? He saw what our ancestors went through and had a visceral reaction.
Wow.
So can you imagine that small example multiplied by 1 million?
And when you think about that, you've had now your son had that kind of a reaction to something that is a part of history.
Absolutely.
These kinds of abuse that we can't even imagine today were part of the everyday life of African Americans, certainly in the times of slavery. You and I had a conversation even prior to today, and we were talking about certain types of experiments that were done. I read up on them myself. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the classic ones is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. That's pretty much, a lot of people can remember that. That went from 1935, I believe, to the early 70s.
That's right.
So that's not that long ago. And so there's this sense that the black life, the black body was less important. We didn't experience as much pain. We were dispensable. Remember, we were 3/5 human.
Right.
So there was already a view of us as non-human. Therefore, they may be more loving towards a dog than they would be to, let's say, an African slave.
Well, for the viewers that are not familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, that had to do with experiments with African American men who were being injected
Absolutely.
with the virus, and there's people that might be watching that are not aware of that.
Absolutely. And it was a movie as well. I'm not sure if it was Cicely Tyson that played the nurse that was actually injecting the men. But yes, it was to determine how syphilis impacted the body, what degenerated in the body, what occurred with their mental health. And so that's one way that we're expendable bodies, and that's one way that we were used as experiments. And those types of stories where we're experiments makes a lot of us feel generationally that we cannot trust the medical community. We cannot trust the mental health community because we might be being experimented upon.
Right, right, and there's also been the what is it, the J. Marion Sims also was another issue that, and he was considered the father of modern gynecology.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what was going on with that?
Yeah, he used black enslaved women to explore the reproductive systems. So he designed certain equipment. For example, the equipment that opens the vaginal passage was used on black women. No anesthesia, did experiments on the reproductive organs. No anesthesia, because it was also viewed that we don't experience as much pain as white people. So that was a very common belief.
So is it possible that having a history of oppression and abuse could have a psychological impact on people of color even today? Could that be something that's passed on, that if we haven't gotten the help, it goes on from the parents from the grandparents to the children to the grandchildren?
Well, let me give you a very everyday example of that. You know that idea of what we say in the house stays in the house?
Right.
Most people know what that means.
Right.
And we've used that through generations.
Wow.
So that we don't expose ourselves to some additional problem outside our household. And so what that does, it causes people to not want to share their pain, their depression, their anxiety. They won't share it.
Wow.
Because they buy into that. It is an adaptive strategy, actually. When you think about it through slavery, you don't want the master to know what we're going through. You just want to go out, do the work, come back with the least amount of lashes on you. So that whole idea of not revealing what's really going on with you was a survival strategy.
Wow.
It's just that now we're holding our issues inside, and we're anxious, we're depressed, we're suicidal from that one of those basic life-saving words.
Well, we're going to go to break, but when we come back from break, I want to talk about some of the coping mechanisms or not, and more about the concerns that people of color have with going into getting the help that they need. Legitimate Matters. This is William Parris. This is a very important topic. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.